Good evening. My name is Sarah Whiting. I'm the Dean. As Michael Anthony and Rami already mentioned earlier, Black in Design turns 10 with this conference, which began here at the GSD in 2015, for anyone who's not good at math, thanks to the inspiration and work of 8 women: Kara Michelle, Courtney Jacobovitz, sorry, Courtney, Shani Carter McKinney, Blair Story Johnson, Megan Eccles, Azura Cox, Catherine Curiel, Allison Green, and this year's faculty advisor, Dana McKinney-White. 6 of these 8 are here at the conference over this weekend. Can we give them a hand? And I want to give a shout out to MDes and MLA candidate Kiki Cooper, who managed to get everyone to sit down. But more importantly, she and all the other Black in Design organizers who put together this year's conference, Black Roots, Grounded, and Growing Towards Collective Futures. Congratulations. I also want to thank Sarah Rafson, Raquel Rivera, and Matt Smith, all members of the events team, for the support they've given this conference, all on the heels of the Green Prize Symposium that took place Wednesday and Thursday. Thank you for your endurance. Finally, I'm thrilled to thank Tawan Davis, who received his MBA from that school across the river in 2006, for his generous gift from the Tawan Davis Impact Foundation that supports this Black in Design conference. We're really pleased that Tawan can be with us here today. Can you please stand? Oh, you're not even going to stand. You're just going to raise your arm. Tawan is the founding partner and CEO of the Steinbridge Group, which is based in New York City. Steinbridge is an impact investing firm with a focus on real estate. They focus specifically on catalyzing underutilized assets to economically productive uses, providing attainable rental homes to working families, and helping pave the path to home ownership. It's an amazing firm that does really important work. So, I've had the pleasure of getting to know Tawan, who is, as they say in these parts, wicked smart. He does good in the world both through his professional work and his philanthropic work. Given the particular constraints that have recently been imposed upon our school and university, his support for this conference this year is especially meaningful. Please join me in thanking Tawan Davis. Okay, so happy 10th birthday, Black in Design. I can assure you that at the age of 10, I didn't have the smarts or the style that marks this event. And I'm not going to tell you what year that was, since most of you weren't even born. In 10 years, over 5 conferences, Black in Design has grown to be a powerful event in the school and well beyond, showcasing the work of Black designers, practitioners, writers, academics, and others, while fostering a powerful network that brings together all the presenters, all those in the audience, brings them all together, joining them to those who populated the 4 previous conferences. Now, Harvard knows networking. Harvard is pretty much synonymous with networking. And honestly, from the point of view of this dean, at times the zeal for networking interferes with the value of being a university, the value of our research, our classes, our work, in short, our growth as students and as faculty. The drive to network at Harvard can tamp down ambition, risk, and innovation because networks often seem to be defined from without. They're transactional in nature. They're a means to an end, and that end is often getting ahead. What I love about Black in Design is that you all repeatedly reference not networking, but community. The extensive community of Black in Design is beautifully illustrated in the exhibition Black Roots, a chronoconstellation and family tree that's on view in the experiments wall just outside Piper Auditorium. 10 years on, this community is ginormous. I'm not great with numbers, but really 400 people are registered for this conference, and who knows how many others are watching by Zoom. Community is an elastic term. Like family, community isn't transactional, but is necessarily generous. As Thanksgiving approaches, we all know that we have at least one family member who requires generosity for dinner to go smoothly. Community nurtures us to grow, but growth isn't defined purely as getting ahead. And as Ife noted in the previous panel, people want to be in community right now more than ever. If I have an ask for you, it's that you take care to leverage this valuable community. Not leverage in a monetary sense, although given our fiscal challenge, I always welcome any fiscal contributions to the school. Thank you. Seriously, I mean leverage in an impact sense. The world, your generation, face challenges on so many fronts: economic, environmental, social, political, so many more. Please make sure that Black in Design, this Black in Design community, this powerful community whose roots go deep and whose branches extend far, acts to help move this world forward. We all need a resilient, just, and beautiful world. That's the motto of the school. How can we get right by the land, as she asked in the panel that preceded this session? How can we create a world that breaks away from the injustices that were the foundation of our contemporary world? How can we design a world that doesn't rely on inequity to benefit some but not others? These are the questions that I urge all of us to face head-on through design. Okay, I have a clock here that is flashing at me in red. I know I've overstayed my time at the mic. My real job, actually my only job at this conference, is to offer thanks and then to turn the mic over to two Black in Design co-chairs who will themselves introduce tonight's keynote. So let me invite Donald and Milena to the podium to introduce tonight's keynote event. Thank you. Thanks.
Wow. First of all, thank you so much for being with us here tonight. There's many other places that you can be, and we're so excited that we can share, connect, and learn from each other in this beautiful forum and platform.
Yeah, thank you everybody for coming here tonight. My name is Donald Olarinsoba. The last name is Yoruba. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria, but I was raised in Tampa, Florida, and I'm studying architecture here at the GSD.
And my name is Milena Almedica. I am a student studying urban planning here at the GSD, and my family hails from the beautiful islands of Jamaica and Puerto Rico.
We would like to remind you that if you're just joining us, that we have live captioning available. For those joining virtually, please click the closed caption icon. For our in-person audience, please use the QR code currently on screen. Please visit the AV booth if you need any assistance. Tonight we are excited to introduce the keynote, The Spider, the Rabbit, and the Preacher Man. This keynote pairs two speakers who look at Black methodologies and design throughout different lenses. They both think across disciplines, investigating Black history and the built environment. The narrative of Anansi, a spider known for his trickery, wit, and knowledge, is a story passed down through the Akan religion and spread through the Americas. These stories are mixed messages, treatises on the way of being, and most of all, a warning on the repercussions of our individual decisions on the collective well-being. The importance of these stories has been passed down generationally to inform a tradition of Black folklore as practices of being and not being in the world. Apprehending this folklore beyond this reductive classification has become the impetus of many multidisciplinary artists and designers' work in identifying methods of praxis that is distinct to the Black diasporic culture. Through this apprehension of the ways of knowing embedded within this folklore, we're able to follow the thread of Black ontologies, of design practices and spatial theories. Beginning this frame, we choose a keynote for the Black Roots Conference that speaks to the work of the Black design as somewhere between an altar and a dance floor. The productive outcome of Black making is meditated through cultural processes and practices that emerged centuries ago, and we are carried with us in our forced migration and chosen mobilities as we encounter new landscapes, new spaces of placemaking. We can trace the spirit of Black design and how these beliefs from the convenient have adapted, morphed, and invaded the spaces that we design today.
Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Daye. Daye fabricates, teaches, and theorizes about time, space, matter, and spirit. His work explores how culture, climate, class, conflict, and chaos are expressed in the built environments across the diaspora. He is an assistant professor of architecture at California State Polytechnic University, Pomona, and he holds degrees from the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of California, Los Angeles. Curry Hackett, who will join Daye on stage for a conversation afterward, is a transdisciplinary designer, visual artist, and educator, exploring Black relationships to land, media, and memory. His work spans across scales and mediums to speculate on the aesthetics and ecologies of the American South. Curry holds architecture degrees from Howard University and the Harvard Graduate School of Design, and currently serves as a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication at the NYU Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. Please give a round of applause to welcome our speakers to the stage. Thank you.
Should I talk into this, or am I mic'd up? All right, cool. Good evening. How's everybody doing? So, here's the deal. This is not going to be like, I'm going to talk and you're going to listen. So I need your attention. I need you guys to kind of be with me. And so I'm going to ask, and you don't have to do it. I know everybody's going to act like they're all shy, but I know you're not shy because I've been seeing how you guys talk to each other. So if you guys could all just come as close as you can to the stage, because we're going to do a lot of shared storytelling tonight, okay? So no pressure, nobody's watching, but the house lights are still on. I'm not going to talk a lot about myself today. I'm going to get right into this talk. And before I do that, I want to kind of explain what the setup is going to be. So giving lectures is pretty boring for me. Instead, I like to try to figure out how we can really have praxis in the things that are important to us, right? We are here to talk about Black roots. We're here to talk about Black design. And so when I started to think about how we could have that conversation, I was like, well, maybe we need to kind of design the conversation as well, right? So I don't think of this as a lecture. I think of this as like a theoretical improvisation. That's what's going to be happening. So there's some things that are written, there's some things that are composed, think Mingus, and then there's some things that are free, think Coltrane. And it's going to require us to be Black as fuck, essentially. So in order to do that, the first thing that I'm going to have you guys do is I need everybody to look under your seats. If you're one of the lucky few that had something under your seat, I would... Yeah. Those are the breaks. If you're one of the lucky few that had something under your seat, and if you're feeling like you want to share, you can. You have been chosen by the spirits that be as to represent one of our ancestors today. So through this talk, I'm going to be referencing a lot of things, and it's not that interesting to me to recite what other people say, so you guys are going to do it. All right? So at the top of the page, if you guys have one in your hand, you'll see your new name. Your new name at the top of the page. And so you can stand up. If everybody who's got a paper wants to stand up just really quick so we can see who got it. Okay. I see some Tyler the Creators, okay. Some Jamila Woods. Okay, cool. All right, you guys don't have to stay standing, but just remember, sometimes the people who are talking are going to be those people. It's not going to be me, okay? So just be ready for that. You guys can sit down now. We can turn the lights back down. Now that we've said that, we're loose up, had some laughs, getting to know each other. Let's start, I think, the best way to start, which is always with the story. Anansi in the land of the dead. The rains had just ended, and the harvest had been so good. Anansi and his brother and his sister spent all their gold on big feasts and palm wine and good times. But now the dry winds of Hamarta began to blow and their stomachs began to growl. Anansi scratched his chin with his one hand. Well, you see, back then, he actually only had the one arm. He wasn't actually the eight-legged trickster that we now know and love today. So he scratched his chin with his one arm and he said, "Brother, sister, we have to find some work before hunger finds us first." So one day, I think it was a Friday, kind of like today, they headed down the red road that led to the coast looking for work. But everywhere they stopped, they met the same response. I can't do nothing with a one-armed man, they said. Not enough grip for a full day's work. It was really starting to bum them out. The sun began to set in the west, and they were growing tired and weary. They came across a grand house built on the edge of the ocean. It seemed to stretch to the other side of the horizon, and the smell of salt and sea breeze rolled straight through its huge doorway. Standing there with a weak smile on their face was a pale, old, sickly man. Anansi, ever the polite spider, greeted him. "Hello, sir," he said. "Good evening, children," he said, smiling back. But when he smiled, his teeth flashed like golden sun on the water. Quickly, they realized his teeth weren't just bright, they were full of gold. In fact, his mouth was full of the most brilliant gold they'd ever seen. Anansi's eyes widened. "Hey, grandfather, how'd you come to have teeth of gold like that?" The old man laughed. Oh, these? I got these from my house. You see, it's full of gold. My house is magic, you see. Whatever enters my house is doubled. You bring one thing inside, and you'll have two when you leave. Now, Anansi might not be a trickster just yet, but he's not an idiot. He was like, okay, this is probably a lie. And the old man winked knowingly. Hey, don't take my word for it. Stick your hand through the doorway, and you'll see. You don't even need to enter. You can just stick your hand right through the door. So Anansi stuffed a little bit of his money, because that was the goal of going out to get some money, and he pushed one hand through the crack of the door, and when he pulled it back out, sure enough, he had two arms. And in each hand, he had a huge amount of gold. Anansi stood in disbelief. The old man smiled again. If you want more, you can. You just have to help me a little around the place. It's not much, just a little housework. And of course, everything you make, the house will double it. Anansi turned to his sister, because that's the kind of person Anansi is. "My sister, you are strong and kind. Go inside and work for the old man for me. Tomorrow, we will have more money than you could shake a stick at." "Yes, tomorrow," the old man said. So his sister went inside the house, and the door closed behind her. The next morning, I think it was a Saturday, right, obviously, Anansi returned to see the old man standing in the doorway, but no sign of his sister. Unperturbed, he rubbed his two hands together, and he said, "Hey, old man, where's my sister? And where's her money?" "Ah," said the old man, "she's working in the back. Don't worry about it. But here, you can reach in and take her earnings." Anansi pushed both of his hands through the door, and he pulled out 4 handfuls of gold. He couldn't believe it. He had never seen this much money in his life. He was like, this is awesome. Anansi, still smiling, the old man said, "Your sister works really well, but my backyard could also use a little bit of tidying up. Maybe your brother could help?" Anansi nodded eagerly. "Oh, yes, brother, go help the old man. By tomorrow, we will be richer than kings." "Yes, tomorrow," the old man said. So his brother went inside the house, and the door closed behind him. And on the 3rd day, I guess it was Sunday, Anansi came back, but the old man was nowhere to be seen. The house seemed silent, except for the whispering sea. The door creaked open by itself, and the scent of an ocean breeze passed through the door. The voice of the old man called from inside. "Come on in, Anansi. Your family's just out back. And your pay is on the table." He stepped inside the dark house, and before he could see anything, his arms multiplied again. 4 more sprouting from his body, 8 in total, and each one heavy with gold. Now, before he could hop up with joy, a broom came down, swinging at his head. Moving fast with his new 8 legs, he leapt to the ceiling, just out of the smiling man's reach. And slowly but surely, his eyes adjusted to the dark. What he saw made his heart tremble. The house wasn't a house at all. It was a deep, dark mine. Down below, his brother, his sister, and many others were digging endlessly for gold, for cobalt, forever. "Anansi," his brothers shouted, "run! This isn't a house of riches. It's the land of the dead." His sister screamed far from below, "We're trapped here now, but you have to get out of here. This old man is Brother Death himself." But the old man just stood there smiling, his gold teeth glinting in the dark, watching, waiting. And just then, that ocean breeze floated past, and Anansi noticed a window on the other side of the room. Thinking quickly, sorry, this is new for me too. Dramatic pause. Thinking quickly, he cast a long web into the air, and catching the breeze, he floated right out of there. He floated for many days over the ocean until he couldn't even remember how long he'd been drifting. After some time, he landed in a strange land filled with strange animals he'd never seen before. All the animals were different. He saw foxes and bears, and he was terribly alone. How sad. And to make matters worse, all that gold turned to mud as soon as he touched the land. His money was no good here. And at that very moment, he saw a rabbit hopping past. The end. So, so in order to talk about Black roots, we have to kind of talk about what it means to talk about roots. So what are roots exactly? Well, when we're talking about roots in this sense, I guess what we're really talking about is culture. And so let's do what any good academic would do. Let's talk etymology, right? So what does the word culture come from? The word culture, as you can see right here, the word culture comes from the French culture and the Latin cultura. All of these words, all of the roots, when they go back, they actually reference a tilling of the earth, this culture of the soil. That's the original meaning of the word culture. And importantly, this soil comes up again and again when we talk about roots, right? So if we also look at the word indigenous and what it means to be indigenous, the word too means to be native. Native to a specific locality, native to a specific place, rooted in the land and born in that place. As you can see, there's a direct correlation to where one is born and to one's land. And land is crucial. From the land back movement to Ukraine, to Gaza, to the deep, dark earth of the African countries, though rich in cobalt, manganese, and culture, still has little but exploitation and extraction across the land. And despite their apparent differences, all of these struggles are between the longtime occupants of the land and the occupying forces of the land. Now, a young man who, I can't remember his last name, but his first name was Malcolm, said, "Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom and justice and equality." And history shows that this sentiment is true more often than not. Ukrainians, Palestinians, Congolese, the people of the world all over are struggling to maintain and protect the sovereignty of their land. Now, as for myself and for generational African Americans, where do we fall in this category? We are neither indigenous, we are not technically settlers, we are not technically immigrants, we are not technically refugees. I think maybe Nicole Hannah-Jones might have something to say about this. Stand up, please.
They say our people were born in the water. And when it occurred, no one can say for certain. Perhaps it was the second week or the third, but surely by the fourth, when they had after fear had turned resignation to a bidding understanding. The till eternity of the Atlantic Ocean had severed them so completely from what had once been their home that it was as if nothing had ever existed before, as if everything and everyone they cherished had simply vanished from the earth. They were no longer Bundu or Akan or Fulani, these men and women from many different nations, all shackled together in the suffocating hull of the ship. They were one people now.
Yeah. So now what? What do we do after that? This is the fundamental difference between members of those whose ancestors were the first victims of the Ma'afa and many of the other oppressed people of the world. This almost but never complete severing created, for the first time in human history, a new people, born with no clear origin, no clear homeland, and no clear roots. This absence, this constructed negative space where typically culture is located, is the crux of the main argument made by a group of theorists called the Afro-pessimists. Their argument, generally constructed, goes as such. Blackness, specifically blackness for those descended from the Ma'afa, so the transatlantic slave trade, is a state of being that is inherently at its core one of social death. Its very existence only serves as a foil to what it means to be human. As such, anti-Black violence is not just a feature of the modern world, right? The whole world is built on it. The judicial and extrajudicial killing, terrorizing, and disenfranchisement of Black people is the very foundation of modern capitalist society. In fact, this conclusion is not one that comes from the Afro-pessimists themselves, really. It actually is drawn from a reading from the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court's very own interpretation of the US Constitution in the Dred Scott case. Now, I could talk at length about this case, but I actually think that former Supreme Court Justice Roger Taney and Fred Wilderson III can just hash it out for themselves. Supreme Court Justice, is that you? Fred, is that you?
All right. Thank you.
The question is simply this: can a Negro whose ancestors were imported into this country and sold as slaves become a member of the political community formed and brought into existence by the Constitution of the United States, and as such become entitled to all the rights and privileges and immunities guaranteed by that instrument to the citizen? It will be observed that the plea applies to that class of persons only whose ancestors were Negroes of the African race and imported into this country and sold and held as slaves. The only matter in issue before the court, therefore, is whether the descendants of such slaves, when they shall be emancipated, or who are born of parents who had become free before their birth, are citizens of a state, in the sense in which the word citizen is used in the Constitution of the United States.
What do you have to say, Fred?
The Supreme Court returns Dred Scott to slavery, and then it says, we're not siding with the court that returned him to slavery because he didn't get freedom from his master. We are trying to correct your thinking in this. In order for Dred Scott to appear before the bar, he had to become a jurisprudential subject, and Africa is a place of non-community. There's no such thing as a jurisprudential subject that can come out of Africa. We are returning him to slavery not because he didn't get freedom from his master, but because he has no standing before the bar.
No one of that race had ever migrated to the United States voluntarily. All of them had been brought here as articles of merchandise. The number that had been emancipated at that time but were few in comparison to those held in slavery, and they were identified in the public mind with the race to which they belonged and regarded as part of the slave population rather than the free. It is obvious that they were not even in the minds of the framers of the Constitution when they were conferring special rights and privileges upon the citizens of a state in every other part of the Union.
And then they go on to talk about Native Americans, and they say that Native Americans actually have political community.
The situation of this population was altogether unlike that of the Indian race. Although they were uncivilized, they were yet a free and independent people, associated together in nations or tribes and governed by their own laws.
Being a lawyer is tough.
These Indian governments were regarded and treated as foreign governments, but they may, without doubt, like the subjects of any other foreign government, be naturalized by the authority of Congress and become citizens of a state and of the United States. And if an individual should leave his nation or tribe and take up his abode among the white population, he would be entitled to all the rights and privileges which would belong to an emigrant from any other foreign people.
This is to say that the people on reservations are subjects worthy of jurisprudential adjudication. So in other words, return him to slavery not because he didn't get permission to be freed, but because he is not a human being.
Thank you guys for reading that. So, as we can see, without the amendments, the US Constitution only considered citizenship available to those who had migrated voluntarily, or whose origin point was recognized as a sovereign nation. Can a Negro whose ancestors were imported into this country and sold as slaves doesn't meet any of those criteria? Their origin is indeterminate. This directs us to two key points. The first, that the radical isolation of the Black experience is fundamentally distinct from other identity groups in its totalizing victimhood in this sense. Solidarity becomes a little fraught between different factions, because the loss that Blackness endures, and when I say Blackness in this sense, I'm specifically referring to those on on the continents after the continent, the second continental African Americans, right? The loss that is endured by that type of Blackness is not literal and tangible or physical, like the loss of land or the loss of an object. It's the loss that is abstract and historical. It's, as Jared Saxon says, it's not a loss that the self experiences of language, lineage, or land, or labor even. It's actually the loss of the self that could experience the loss. The second thing that it points us to, that Blackness as a category was constructed alongside the construction of capital and relegated to the status of property, meaning that it was necessary to create the conditions in which human beings could no longer relate to Blackness as humankind, because they are now products. The Black body had to be taken off the map with respect to the cartography that charts a civil society's semiotics. We have a past, we don't have heritage. And this project was so violent, so totalizing, so maliciously pursued that volumes and volumes of literature and film and song have been dedicated to try to theorize or explain or reconcile this truth. But perhaps the most pertinent thing to ask, if we're trying to figure out what it means to have Black roots, is actually just to ask a question. So the question that I want to ask is a question that was proposed for a very different purpose and for a very different audience by a person who may or may not have thought of his role as being an accidental bard for this question. But shouting out from the first track on the first side of the album in Huey's Hands, our accidental bard, Bob Dylan, says, "How does it feel to be on your own? No direction home, like a rolling stone. How does it feel?" And maybe generations and generations after that, another ancestor, more recent, echoes back, "How does it feel?" Do you know what I'm talking about, baby? Rest in peace, D'Angelo. It necessitated the destruction of our relation to our roots. That's what this process is about. But it didn't destroy them. I mean, for all intents and purposes, direct access to these Black roots has been damaged and in many cases completely severed, but something still remains. We can't touch the root maybe. Maybe we can only remember it. Maybe we can only whisper it. Maybe it becomes a legend. Maybe it becomes a strand of DNA. Maybe the root is actually a seed. Is Octavia Butler in the house tonight? It's good to see you again.
A tree cannot grow in its parent's shadows. The self must create its own reasons for being. Octavia Butler, Parable of the Sower, Parable of the Talents, Earthseed, Book of the Living.
Thank you. This distinction between a thing that is a seed and a thing that is a root is an important one. Here we have two completely different ways of thinking about culture, ethnicity, and two resultant ways of thinking about design. So what does it mean to be a root culture? What does it mean to be a seed culture? Perhaps no piece of pop culture illustrates the essence of this difference better. And I also spent a lot of time in the Bay, so we're going to take it back to the Bay. Then the 2018 film Black Panther. The focus here is on the effects of the heart-shaped herb, if you guys remember. It's the root of a plant that's native to this fictional African nation of Wakanda. And this herb is a crucial part of a ceremony that all future royalty of this country have to take before ascending the throne. After ingesting the herb and being buried alive, one is taken to the ancestral plane. As we see, the spatial and temporal aspects of the ancestral plane differ depending on the person who takes the herb. So first, let's see what happens to T'Challa. Chadwick's King T'Challa awakes, rises from the literal earth into a savanna-like plain that stretches to the horizon, purple and orange-hued aurora borealis signaling the mystical astral dimensions of this place. In front of him is a tree, from which the watchful eyes of his forebears stare at him, first as silhouetted panthers, and then again in human form. In this space, he's able to commune with them, to seek guidance, to seek advice, or even, sometimes as we see later in the movie, to rebuke them. He literally comes to this place to talk to his past. And it can be a heartwarming experience.
The time has come
Or it
for
can
you
be
to
one
come home.
where he expresses his
Be
anger,
reunited with me.
where he expresses his displeasure with his ancestors. Okay. Sorry, I almost got caught up watching the movie again. Now let's compare that to what happens when his cousin takes the herb. He doesn't wake up in the dirt. He walks up to his flat in Oakland, apartment number 1401, and he opens the door to his father's one-bedroom apartment, actually filmed at the Wheat Street Towers near the King Center, the Martin Luther King Jr. Center, by J. Max Bond in Atlanta, Georgia. He doesn't see his lineage stretched out before him. Instead, it's just him and the spirit of his single-parent household, his father. It is only intermittently through the windows that the purple and orange aurora can be seen. His past has been completely abstracted into an approximately 575 square foot box. Though the movie often flirts with trope after trope, many of the underlying structures and motifs are super clear. Coogler is trying to visualize for us the psychic space of alienation created by the Ma'afa. An alienation so severe indeed that Killmonger, the absolute wayward seed that he is and that he represents, starts to look back at his own roots in scorn. I should have taken you back long ago. Instead, we are both abandoned here, his father Njobu says. Killmonger then speaks for those of us who are forced to wrestle with the fact that the Ma'afa was not spurred simply by outsiders or by white devils or foreign influence, but that in fact many of African blood sold their own to slavers. That our own people were not so black and so beautiful that they were not above being seduced by the promise of capital and of conquest. Crying, angry, rejected, and self-righteous, he speaks to his father's spirit. Well, maybe your home is actually the one that's lost. But lest this becomes an instigation to the self-destructive infighting of the diaspora wars, we should rather think of this as a point of departure for understanding the lived and cultural distinctions between a rooted existence and a seated existence. It is not a hierarchical classification strategy. It's just one of categories. To be rooted is not better or necessarily preferable to being sown. It's simply a different way of being. Rooted culture isn't located in any one region of the world or with any particular modality. Rather, its primary characteristics is simply time depth. To be a rooted culture, one societal world must have a couple of key points. You must have a deep ancestral cultural and ecological continuity in a specific territory, a distinctive cultural and linguistic practice that must be maintained, a rich material culture that embodies its values and its cosmology, and a functioning political or social structure distinct from competing or contemporary traditions. An easy way to describe this might be like this. If you were to marry into to a person, or if you were to get married to a person from one of these cultures, there would be traditional clothing, language, cuisine, and rituals, perhaps including song and dance, that would have to be performed in order for the ritual of marriage to be sanctified in that culture. That's like the easy litmus test. These cultures typically have deep and rich traditions that tend to be tied directly to the landscapes of their origin. Typically, not just their national, but also their personal and genetic histories trace back generations in a way that is both generally known and embodied, and it's also just a lived experience. An example of this would be, I'm going to butcher the actual name of this, but I believe it's the Qingming Festival, the annual Chinese ritual of the sweeping of the graves. So once a year, families return to their ancestral lands to bring offerings and clean the tombs of their ancestors. Another example could be Nigeria's New Yam Festival, which blends both ancestral and spiritual veneration, and spiritual veneration with agricultural markers of time and production. So this ties that back to the land specifically, right? These traditional festivals are often bound tightly, very tightly to the land. They reference seasonal changes in native plant life, as we see in the Yam Festival, agriculture, and sometimes you can only even celebrate it if you go home. Like you can't even, like sometimes you can do it as part of the diaspora, but sometimes you actually just gotta go home. You can't sweep off your ancestors' graves in China here, you gotta go home, right? And it requires that participants periodically renew this connection. Like you have to go back to keep the root. You have to feed the root, right? So on another level, it's also important that these traditions are enshrined in legal and state traditions as well as observed in an informal, individual, and local level. It's kind of like the fact that for us to have an African American nation, it would be kind of odd to only have celebrated Juneteenth for approximately 5 years now, right? So the list of so-called root cultures is long and varied. It encompasses matriarchal structures, patriarchal structures, oral traditions, written traditions, strong hierarchies, weak hierarchies, British people, Japanese people, German people, Chinese people, Ghanaian people, Ethiopian people, Italian people, all the various indigenous nations and tribes across every continent and more. Its distinctive characteristics can be found in nations and histories of all shades, in all mixes, and in all corners of the globe. Rather than being inclusive to the point of uselessness, right? Because like, okay, so if everybody's a root culture, then nobody's a root culture, right? These criteria also point to some interesting consequences. For example, to have developed a strong, and this is a key word here, distinctive cultural attitude and tradition, they must have been originally developed in relative isolation from other cultural forces and pressures, when they were originally developed, right? While there's always a conversation between cultural concepts, the very existence of a root system suggests primary, secondary, and tertiary components of the culture in question, right? And that relationship between deeper, thicker aspects and newer, more lateral movements in the ground, you can arrange them, you know, maybe for those of us who like, I don't know, what's his name? Henry, I don't want to say Thoreau, but it's, everybody's always quoting him when they start taking social science all the time. Discipline thing, what is his name? It's gonna really bother me. Anyway, some French guy. Foucault. I knew somebody was gonna get it here at Harvard. I was like, this is taking way too long, you all failed. So, you know, Foucault and Lacan, they talk about like, they talk about like rhizomatic structures, which are like structures that move laterally instead of hierarchically, right? But even if you move laterally through a root system, like think about it, visualize a root in your mind, the longer the root, one part of the root has been there, it's always just gonna be thicker. Even if you move laterally, that time depth will be relevant in the cross-section, right? So that means that while there's of course the possibility for multiple cultures to collide and morph into each other, there's still a core. There's still a core root that the newer or perhaps more foreign aspects are filtered through and oriented towards. So, for example, when we talk about I'm gonna butcher this as well, the Hallyu, the Korean wave that we're all in right now with Squid Games and K-pop Demon Hunters, we can see that while K-pop is so obviously indebted to Missy Elliott and Black American hip-hop and R&B and dance, just as much as it also owes a lot to Scandinavian Europop and Max Martin and Britney Spears. And K-dramas are formatted essentially by brick, they're kind of exactly like Latin American telenovelas, right? But they all have a distinctly Korean direction or attitude that orients them and ties them both in content and context to a Korean landscape of culture, right? So just because they're able to take on these things, there's still an orientation that they have. The same could be said of Russian funk, which is like this crazy Slavic version of Memphis trap music. Japanese Lolita fashion culture, which is like all of a sudden we're in Victoria, England, and any number of cultural hybrids across the world. So fundamentally then, if you had to originally have developed in that kind of isolation, so you could take on these other cultures, probably these root cultures were already crystallized before globalization. That means that gave them enough time to be able to adapt and change or even be destroyed by a world of increasingly fuzzy boundaries of capitalism. In fact, a good litmus test for a root culture is the so-called Age of Discovery from the 15th to 17th centuries. This moment when Turtle Island became more widely known to other cultures across the globe, and cultures were encouraged and coerced into entering relationships that had never been seen before. It was the age of capital, the age of the export, the age of the seed. Okay, so Kevin, what are we talking about here? So, what do we mean when we say a seed culture? Well, we can locate a few main criteria. It's portable. That is to say that it doesn't have its origins in a specific locality or location. So this is different from a nomadic culture, right? Like nomadic cultures move from place to place, but they move from place to place in a specific region, right? So you might be thinking about the indigenous people of the Great Plains or the Tuaregs in the Sahara Desert, but they're still in the Sahara Desert, and they're still in the Great Plains. It's syncretic. So that's to say that its origins, not just its expressions, right? So K-pop is an expression, but its origins are actually completely syncretic. Its practices, rituals, and languages are not distinct and might not even use their own native language, right? It is also non-indigenous. That is to say that its manifestations are not located near the landscapes of its origin, right? So wherever it is isn't necessarily where it was born. But it's also probably non-colonial. There's not an expansionist urge. It is immaterial. That is to say that even in advanced stages of development, its production, its focus of production is not on material culture, rather on intangible or temporal cultural artifacts. That doesn't suggest that material artifacts are never created, just that they're not the main focus. And maybe most important, it's embodied, right? So it's not, a seed culture is not one that relies a lot on text or things like that. The way that you know it is through the doing, through the living, through the breathing, through the speaking, right? So all of these criteria have to be present, really, in order to be considered a seed culture. For example, Jamaican and Haitian cultures, even though similar to continental black populations in syncretic aspects or some immaterial aspects, do not meet the first criteria of it being portable and the third criteria of it being non-indigenous, as their cultural development is completely and thoroughly tied to the islands from which they originate. Now this is complicated, right? Because they're not the original occupants of the island. But at this point, they are it's almost like a mono-ethnic kind of situation in some of these places, right? But let's not be so serious all the time. Maybe a lower fidelity, slightly humorous way to think about it is to just have somebody from a rooted culture just ask you your favorite question, which is like, so like, where are you from? I mean, like where are you really from? Like, I mean, I know that like you're from California, but like, you know, like where are you like from, right? If they're satisfied in one or two responses, probably you belong to a rooted culture. The truest seed cultures, nobody's ever satisfied. Nobody's ever like, okay, I believe you, you're from Oakland, right? It doesn't work like that. And this isn't necessarily a negative thing, it's just that this lack of material culture makes it easy for people from rooted cultures to dismiss seed cultures as not being like as real or not even existing because they don't share the more recognizable hallmarks as dictated by fields like anthropology and archaeology. This lack of typical definition can be uncomfortable both for those trying to categorize you and for those being categorized, as it's inevitably going to make you feel invisible. Oftentimes, the desire to self-define becomes a primary urge to cultures that are more seed-like. So think about seed and root as kind of like a spectrum, and you can be more or less oriented in that direction. Reflecting on the Francophone philosophical movement of negritude, which sought to restore pride in newly independent black nations, the legendary Nigerian writer Wole Soyinka reportedly commented, this is a wild quote, a tiger does not proclaim his tigritude, he pounces, right? So a common critique of seed cultures is exactly this, right? That you don't need to write a manifesto to be who you are. You don't need to define yourself through a speech. You just are who you are, right? Though this might seem like an admonition at first, it's actually just a manifestation of the difference between how a rooted culture and how a seed culture perceives legitimacy. This being, however, just being of who you are, it's not for free, it costs something. All root cultures must dedicate a lot of energy to maintaining their traditions. The old ways are constantly at risk of disappearance from modernization, outmarriage, disuse. Traditional cultures need to establish some sort of boundary or relationship to deal with all of these increasingly hybridized ways of living. Seed cultures, on the other hand, are born in that kind of situation. They're grown in a Creole mestizo environment. So they can put that energy into just generating entirely new forms instead of maintaining the old forms that define them. The frequency and depth at which new forms are invented is unrivaled in the modern world by African American cultural production. Some forms, such as spontaneously composed improvisational music, aka jazz, experienced its entire life cycle in a single generation. I mean, Louis Armstrong was born when jazz started, and by the time he died, he had gotten to play with people like Coltrane. That's like going from, like the ancient rites of the Druids to like serialism in composition, right? Like that all happened in one person's lifetime. It's an extremely productive kind of cultural attitude. So this also points us to another fact, that since most seed cultures are birthed after that first wave of European global colonization, they were also co-developed and fundamentally, and this is really key, entangled with the development of capital itself. So it should come as no surprise then that the artifacts of these cultures are so easily made into products, right? And to a large degree, it is driven by the production of products, right? So I can't think of another culture who you could so easily turn HBCU homecoming into like Coachella, And I think it's quite interesting because most of these cultures are also former colonies. And as colonies, their entire reason for being is fundamentally a capitalist structure. Now, distinction can be made here between colonies that effectively had their native indigenous cultures wiped out as active participants and instead ceding to the settler newcomers and whoever was brought aside along them. An example of that might be the United States, Brazil, Australia, etc. And then there are colonies that instead kept their original ethnic makeup under the thumbs of imperialist power and then through post-decolonization strove to reclaim their original pre-colonial sovereign identity, right? So the through line is different for those two kinds of things. Now, while the former tend towards a syncretic system formed within the bounds of global capital, the latter operated more as an adjustment of a rooted system into this new nation-state system, right? So there are two ways of thinking about that. This fusion of capital into the birthing of a new nation had never been seen before and created new configurations of culture. These so-called nations of the so-called New World were very different from the very moment that they were founded. And to this day, the Americas are the only land masses that by and large contain almost no majority mono-ethnic nations, as well as no nations whose founding, notwithstanding the claims of the indigenous people who lived there, was done by the people who live there currently. Traditionally, ethnic groups and their superstructures usually have a much tighter one-to-one relationship. For example, typically a Japanese person would not only express this as a nationality, but being Japanese also designates their ethnic background, right? And their cultural attitude. In the polyethnic nations of the Americas, this is often and usually is just not the case. Being Brazilian tells you very little about your ethnicity, whether it's rooted in Portugal or Italy or Angola. All of those could be true and none of them could be true and you could still be Brazilian. Notable exceptions here are some island nations once again, which though not currently occupied en masse by the original peoples, are almost completely occupied by a single outsider ethnic group, the involuntarily transported people of African descent. So out of all of these movements of people, perhaps no culture exemplified these traits more than the group of people that would become the first, quote-unquote, African Americans. With the past heritage severed from them, the ability to generate material culture taken from them, a familial and physical landscape in constant flux, a confusing and foreign mixture of extant religions, and the relegation of their own personhood into property, it necessitated an embodied, highly portable method of generating cultural cohesion that could be transferred without access to generational knowledge, generational wealth, generational land. It had to be able to grow and fruit wherever it landed. Everything you needed had to be inside you. It would not be possible to root in this kind of a situation. Instead, you would have to become a seed. The word diaspora comes from the ancient Greek word meaning dispersion or scattering. It's a compound of the prefix dia, which means across and through, and the verb spiro, which means to sow, to scatter. This Greek term was first used in a version of the Bible to describe the scattering of the Jewish people from their homeland, and its meaning has since expanded to refer to any scattering of people from their ancestral homeland. And today, the term is more broadly used to describe any group of people who have migrated from an ancestral homeland, such as the African diaspora. In this sense, we have once again ended where we started, and returned to the metaphor of earth and life, specifically plant life. This time, however, the image is not that of a growing root, it's the image of a sowing of seeds. Not simply to be scattered, but to be sown is what makes one diasporic. So this paradigm shift from thinking about black rooting to black seeding is not a turning away from the past, rather it's an invitation to continue looking deeper within, into the elements that we have abstracted, distilled, and carried with us, and to take seriously our charge as diasporic peoples. The elements are not random that survived, right? The things that survived the transition across the Atlantic or during Reconstruction or during Jim Crow or during the prison industrial complex, whatever the current dumpster fire of the moment is, they survived it for a reason. They're design logic. They have their own grammar. As designers, it's important for us to identify what these elements might be so we can develop a design language that speaks to us and to wherever we end up being sown. We need a sort of diasporic tectonic system. Whew, that's a lot, right? I think we should take a break. You know, I like to tell stories. Can I tell you guys another story? Okay, I'm gonna tell you guys another story. Hold on a second. So, this story is, oh, I almost forgot. Is Richard Adams in the house tonight?
All the world will be your enemy, prince of 1,000 enemies. And whenever they catch you, they will kill you. But first, they must catch you. Be cunning and full of tricks, and your people shall never be destroyed.
That's Richard Adams from Watership Down. Are Montagnat and Sexton in the audience today? Did anybody get that one? See, it's kind of a gamble because I actually don't know who's next to the piece of paper, so we might lose some. Okay.
Spectacle is a form of camouflage. It does not conceal anything. It simply renders it unrecognizable. One looks at it and does not see it. It appears in disguise. Camouflage is a relationship between the one dissimulating their appearance and the one who is fooled, who looks and cannot see.
All right, it's time for another story. Brer Rabbit learns how much a house costs. One day, I believe it was a Friday, after spending all day scrounging the marsh and brush for food, Brer Rabbit sat down in a little form he dug out of the vegetation. Sighing, he looked up and he saw Farmer Edgar sitting on his porch with his wife and kids. They were eating something, and even from all the way over there, it looked delicious. Brer Rabbit looked with envy at Farmer Edgar's house. Man, look at all that space, all that food he's eating, even his beautiful wife and kids. It's not fair that he just shows up here and gets to have all that, while I'm stuck out here with scraps. There has got to be a way to live like that. Just then, he hears a loud yelp and hears a commotion coming from behind the house. Hey, you're not supposed to be here. This is a yard, and it is a very good yard, and it is not yours. Bark, bark. It was Brother Dog chasing after Brer Fox, who had just tried to make off with some food. Out of the way, Brer Fox yelled, streaming past Brer Rabbit. This damn dog is trying to... A loud shot rang out, and Brer Rabbit seemed to see Brer Fox fall in slow motion to the ground. Good boy, protector of the castle, Farmer Edgar yelled out. Brother Dog wagged his tail happily and started back to the house. Oh, hi, little rabbit. Did you see me? Boy, I sure did a good job today. Boss will be really pleased. I'm sure there'll be lots of great food with all the fixins tonight. Brer Rabbit's ears perked up. Hey, Brother Dog, how's that? You mean to tell me that you get to eat good like that all the time? Oh, yeah. As long as you're a good boy and you do the right thing, Boss makes sure you're all taken care of. Here, boy, Farmer Edgar was calling in the distance. Brother Dog turned to Brer Rabbit. Gotta go. Bye, little rabbit. Brer Rabbit sat there, thinking about what he'd just seen, when old Brer Snake slithered down from the tree. I saw you looking at Farmer Edgar's house. You know, if you want, I can show you a way to get inside without having to meet the fate of our late, great Brer Fox. Really? Brer Rabbit said. Well, what do I have to do? And then old Brer Snake showed Brer Rabbit one of his oldest tricks. He shed his skin. He said, now look, all you have to do is do exactly what I do. And if you look at somebody and stare at them, you can be whoever you want to be. You'll just shed your skin. You'll be just like them. Brer Rabbit couldn't believe it. The next day, I think it was a Saturday, he came back to the farmer's house and he snuck under the fence into the yard. Quickly, he darted into the first structure he saw, which happened to be the chicken coop. He quickly locked eyes onto Brer Rooster and shed his skin. Just like that came a rooster. Walking up to Brer Rooster, Brer Rabbit, in disguise of course, asked Brer Rooster, "What are you doing in here?" Brother Rooster looked a little confused for a second. He was like, "I don't remember seeing you around." Oh well, doesn't matter. What were you asking? Brer Rabbit asked again. "What are you doing here?" "Oh, it's great here. Actually, I don't really remember how I got here. But it doesn't really matter. Every once in a while, a big hand comes in through the skylight and throws food down on us. It's awesome. It's great." Wait, what was I talking about again? And just then, as if on cue, Farmer Edgar's kids' hands come straight through the coop, and just like Brer Rooster said, rained corn and grain down on everyone. Well fed and sleepy, Brer Rabbit and the whole coop soon settled down from their feeding frenzy and laid down. You know, this isn't half bad, Brer Rabbit thought as he drifted silently to sleep. Later, he startled awake by the sound of the coop door opening. The farmer and his wife walked in. "Oh, I hate to do this," the wife lamented. "Well, you're the one who said you wanted chicken for dinner." And with that, he reached down and grabbed a chicken by the neck, pulled her straight out of the coop. "Besides, we already have more eggs than we know what to do with." And with that, amid the growing chaos in the coop, in one quick motion, he wrung its neck. Brer Rabbit and Brer Rooster screamed in terror as the coop door closed once again. "I can't believe this. How often does this happen?" Brer Rabbit asked in shock. "It's an outrage," Brer Rooster said. "I can't believe that." And at that moment, the farmer's wife's hand pokes back in and scatters some more meal across the floor. "I'm so sorry, little birdies. Here's some dessert for your trouble." The feeding frenzy starts again and then quiets once more. Brer Rooster looks at Brer Rabbit with empty eyes and said, "I'm sorry. I forgot what we were talking about." "What were you talking about again?" Brer Rabbit retreats to a corner of the coop and he mutters to himself, "Oh, hell no. I gotta get out of here." So the next day, I believe it was on a Sunday, he runs straight out of the coop and under the porch where he sees Brother Dog sleeping. Staring at him, he transforms himself into a dog. Brother Dog wakes up confused. "Huh? Who's this? It's me?" Brer Rabbit explains. "Oh, okay, I guess that makes sense that you can turn into a dog. Well, as long as you're a good boy just like me, I don't see any problem with it." Farmer Edgar comes back and calls for the dog. Notices a second dog. "What's this? The neighbor's mangy mutt escaped again? Well, if you want to be here, you better be of use. Time to go hunting." Farmer Edgar throws a collar onto the dogs. Brer Rabbit has never worn a collar in his whole life, and proceeds to take them into the marsh. He puts the dogs hard to work, sniffing and running and chasing all over the fields. Soon, Brer Rabbit smells something oddly familiar, but he can't quite place it, what with this being his first day having the nose of a dog. Suddenly, he trips over something, and to his surprise, he's staring at a small herd of 4 little baby field rabbits. He yelps in surprise. "Good boy!" A shot rings out across the field. And right in front of him, the herd is reduced to half, the other rabbits scurrying away as fast as they can. As Farmer Edgar walks over to claim his prize, Brer Rabbit pounces on him out of sheer anger, biting him on the leg. The farmer, stunned, reaches for his gun, but before he can wrap his hand around it, another hand beats him to it. Brer Rabbit has transformed again, and this time into Farmer Edgar himself. Brer Rabbit walks back into the house in silence and sits on the porch. Brother Dog follows obediently and curls up on the floor beside him. Soon the farmer's wife comes out, shooing the dog off the porch. "Go on, Git. I know you've been hunting all day, but you know you can't sit up here with us, boy. Now go on, Git." She kisses Brer Rabbit on the cheek. "Dinner'll be ready soon, dear," finishing off that big old rooster from yesterday. Brer Rabbit sat in silence while she walked back into the house, the door closing behind her. Brer Rabbit wasn't very hungry. As he looked over the fertile garden, the sturdy house, and the fields surrounding it, Brer Rabbit made up his mind. "I gotta get out of here. This place is nice, but the price is just too damn high." But as he said it, he realized that old Brer Snake never showed him how to change back without looking at something. So he tried to picture himself, and picture himself, and picture himself, and sure enough, it worked. Finally, back in his rabbit body, he proceeded to hop off the porch when he noticed something strange. His tail was now a pale white. You see, he had never seen his own ass before, so now it just stayed the same color as J. Edgar's behind. All right. Chapter 2. Diasporic tectonics, or bitches brew. A tectonic system in the architectural field is a system that expresses the way that a building is built. It harmonizes the language of the material fact of a building with its artistic form. For example, the architect Louis Kahn was famous for his almost animist attitude towards building. He very literally believed that materials could talk and that the role of the architect was to listen to them and to give expression to what they were trying to tell you. This is a quote from him. You say to brick, "What do you want, brick?" And brick says to you, "I like an arch." Now, why an arch? Kahn is arguing here that in a structural logic of stacking, of all the ways to demonstrate how load is carried down, the way that bricks like to carry loads down, the ultimate form of that logic that's specific to the brick or to the stone is the arch and the keystone. So in order to develop a diasporic tectonic, a tectonic of a seed culture, we also will have to look at the seed culture itself and ask, seed, what are you? And what would you like to be? So let's look at it. Let's take a look at these things. Another important quality of a seed is that it contains everything it needs to grow internally. Typically, even the fanciest of plants essentially only has 3 parts. An embryo, which is a small plant with a tiny root inside of it. The endosperm, which supplies all the nutrients to the seed, and then the seed shell, which encases the other 2 parts. The only other thing that's really needed for a seed to grow is a suitable environment for germination. Similarly, seed culture is organized in much the same way. In each iteration of the culture, it holds not simply a part or an aspect of the culture, but just like a seed, right? The whole plant is inside the seed, but just in an immature state. So the entire cultural makeup of a seed culture exists in every part of the seed culture. It also has, in every iteration, the necessary ingredients to sustain itself at a low level for long durations until the conditions are ripe for germination. In other words, we can think of every single aspect of a seed culture as a latent microcosm of the whole. If we were to translate this botanical metaphor into a design methodology or strategy, the word that we would probably land on is fractal. Diasporic tectonics are fractal. This inherent quality allows for us to make the next important step in defining or recognizing other possible attributes of a diasporic tectonic. Why? Because if the structure of a diasporic tectonic is fractal, then every element that we see in the culture should also be a part of the larger and smaller parts of the culture, right? It's fractal. So keeping in mind that no list could be truly exhaustive, and I also have approximately 5 minutes left, we are going to try to talk a little bit about some of the possible qualities that we might see in this kind of a tectonic system. So I'm going to list them all off, actually, just so I can get them through, because we're not going to be able to finish. And we'll go back and talk about some of them. Okay. One is illegibility. We can think about illegibility the same way that we might think about hush harbors. So in the context of I think I have too many files running. I think my computer's gonna crash. Oh no. It's making the noise. Okay, I'm just gonna talk then for a little bit. So illegibility, hush harbors, and the invisible institution. So this is a quote from Malidoma Patrice Sommet. In order to maintain power, true power, that power must remain hidden. You must surround that power with a great deal of secrecy. Disclosure of power was a sign that power was in the process of decay. So for some reason, becoming visible, or what they call entering the visible realm, was a sign of the gradual erosion of power. Is Sydney Rose Malbert in the audience tonight? Sydney Rose, are you here somewhere? Oh, okay.
Albert Rabbitoe's reference to slave religion as the invisible institution, the invisibility of the Black church, has more to do with its illegibility than an absence of indexing architectural feature. Many prayer meetings were held in secret in woods, gullies, ravines, and thickets, huddled between quilt and rags, demonstrating the refusal of objects.
Thank you. The context of the Ma'afa rendered impossible the ability for the enslaved to practice spiritual and religious rites out in the open. So hush harbors were places where, out of the view and control of the white gaze, identity could be formed and spirits could be called upon. That these places held great powers in an abstraction. The Haitian Revolution began in a diasporic variation of this very same space, right? And white nations everywhere trembled at the thought of a reoccurrence. And to this day, that lingering reverence that we have for that which is underground, whether it's in music or in culture, is maintained today. So that's what I'm calling illegibility, these things that are hidden. Immateriality. An example of this might be soul food or the ring shout. Is Bernice Johnson Reagan in the audience today?
Always.
You can stand up too if you want. All right.
Sound is a way to extend the territory you can affect so people can walk way before they get close to your body. As long as you're singing, they cannot change the air in its face. The song will maintain the air as your territory.
So the lack of access to capital necessitated the development and the refinement of cultural practices that could be maintained when objects disappear, when places disappear, and when people disappear. Thus, practices were focused less on material culture and became more temporal, more embodied. This tendency is so prevalent that the word soul itself has become shorthand for blackness in the diaspora, with a cuisine that, although beautiful, points to a non-physical root as an essential aspect of the culture, right? So like, you know, you don't call Chinese food like wind food, right? But for some reason we call African American food soul food, right? Because there's already this, we've already internalized this idea that whatever it's attached to is not something that exists in this physical world. I actually was gonna have my mom say this quote. Do you wanna say this quote? Because she taught me this thing. You wanna say it? You can say it if you want to. I'm getting so many good sun points for this. This is like huge. Remember you showed me High on the Hog?
Oh.
Remember that? Yeah, just that one.
We are the only people who named our cuisine after something invisible that you could feel, like love and God.
Wonderful.
So this is all to point to something that I think is really important, which is just that these things, the way that they move through the world operates very differently than the way that you might think that a traditional cuisine moves through the world and things like that. Next thing, trying to keep it short, trying to move fast. Plexity. Tricksters, signifying. So plexity is a concept that was kind of originated from one of my favorite science fiction authors, Samuel Delany, in his book Empire Star. He talks about the difference between simplex things, complex things, and multiplex things. Or if you're really, really like not with it, then you're like no-plex. But what he's talking about is a way of thinking about multiplicity that's really, really important. And remember, like all these things I'm talking about, I think of these as design strategies when I think about illegibility, when I think about immateriality, and when I think about plexity. So common interpretations of the black trickster, such as Eshu, Anansi, Brer Rabbit, High John the Conqueror, they tend to focus on this kind of metaphor that W.B. Du Bois kind of forwarded of two-ness, right? The two-ness of blackness. But in my personal opinion, the reading of the symbolism of his two mouths or his two colored robes that confuse the farmers is like the most literal way to understand this, as if it's about the number two. I think it's a sort of holdover of a typical Western mode of duality. But the black tradition is not actually as invested in the category of either or both and, but rather to point towards literal paradox, contradiction, and negation as strategies of being and knowing. Samuel Delany in his book Empire Star defines plexity as a sort of litmus test for how one sees the world. If you see the world in terms of definite answers, simplex. In terms of complexity, complex. But if you're really able to swim in and explore a world of contradiction, paradox, and multiple points of view without it creating any dissonance for you, that's multiplex. And in this sense, to signify is not to mean two things at once, not to double speak, it's to multi-speak. It's manyness. The meaning of that which is indeterminate is not doubled, it's multiplied. Density. The two examples of this, I would say, right, if we're thinking in terms of fractal examples of these things, the projects and sampling. So the compression of time and space in Black life is not abstract, right? The compression of life from the openness of the rural country to the incredibly dense, we just had a huge conversation about this, from the openness of the rural country into the incredibly dense urban cores of post-migration cities did to physical space what policing and surveillance tries to do with time ever since 1619. However, density is also something that can be weaponized in the opposite direction. Density is a method of obscuring, communicating, code switching, and ancestral communication. The parable and the proverb can be thick in meaning in a way that a direct answer cannot. The footnote, the quote, all of these are methods to layer meaning in such a way that you can have richness, and depth of thought, even if it's completely oblique to what you think you might be seeing. As a kind of side note, something that I've always thought is interesting is like sampling is kind of also an atemporal way of doing this, of kind of doing ancestral recall. Interestingly, during hip-hop's golden age, the use of densities of samples in a single track was really common, right? Like De La Soul, Tribe Called Quest, Public Enemy, Wu-Tang, even NWA. Like whether you're with it or not in terms of the content, I think that the use of the samples was a part of the storytelling. The song exposed listeners to wide genres of music and thought, whether it was like Greek psychedelic bands or Kung Fu philosophies, but there was always a political or spiritual, some sort of content, even if it's just about like, you know, street portraiture or if it's about being super conscious and woke. It was always political. But with the advent of more stringent IP laws, that use of sampling completely disappeared. And you only see like maybe one sample per song. And so there's a change in the culture and a shift in the amount of density that you're seeing also as well. So unfortunately, I've run out of time. But thank you guys so much for listening to me ramble up here. The last thing that I'll say is that the subtitle for this talk was Theoretical Improvisation in 3 Acts. And I really hope that this 3rd act of this performance is actually the conversation that you guys have with each other about all the different ways in which we can enact these design strategies. It doesn't have to be, I think that we get so used to the current pedagogy of teaching and what it looks like and how our buildings shape how we're supposed to talk that we kind of forget that we can actually just rearrange all the space whenever we want. And I think that if you have the directive to do that, you should do that, and that would be the 3rd act of this talk. So thank you guys so much, very much. Ready? Okay. Proceed. All right, let's do it. Oh.
That was great, just to say the least. I mean, so much to talk about, so much to unpack. I mean, I found it just, I think just really inspiring just to like play with the format. I'm always thinking about methods, formats, systems, tactics, to kind of shift how we can think about not just design as a kind of discipline or as a practice, but also design as just an exchange or transfer of knowledge and information. So it just got me thinking about, obviously just appreciate just like the unapologetically extra textual approach that you took, like just smashing a bunch of stuff together and just kind of making a case that they belong, right, as a statement. It also got me towards the end thinking about Zora Neale Hurston's essay on the characteristics of Negro expression. You got some double meanings in there, asymmetry. So lots. I'm gonna be taking notes for a little while, I think. I have to say also the first time I think I've heard the word chaos used in someone's bio. So that makes maybe 2 chaos agents on the stage today.
It's difficult to get a job when you put chaos in your bio.
Hey, well, we both hired though,
yeah,
so we both employed.
Figure it out. Ashe?
Yeah. So you know, circled quite a bit around this idea of a seed culture and a root culture. At times it felt like they were, the relationship to me was legible, and other times you were kind of separating them almost like as a dichotomy. And so I'm curious if you're thinking about these two ideas as kind of a switch or a dial. And do you see that relationship really as a spectrum, or am I missing something, or is that a fair characterization of the argument?
I think that it exists on a spectrum, and I think the question for me is actually, if this is even true, like this whole framing, and the way that I think about arguments like this. So my background is in philosophy before I started in the architectural profession, and I think a lot about Karl Marx, because essentially what Karl Marx did is that he did this really great job of being like, everything is labor, and here's what the world is like, everything is labor. And he kind of, it's not like he skipped the step, but like sometimes it feels like he skipped the step of like really actually convincing me that everything was labor. I was like, is everything labor? Because I kind of enjoy like a lot of things. But I think the idea, like, okay, if we just assume that this is true, like what's the logical conclusion? So if like we assume that this framing of culture is true, the real question to me is like, can it be taught? I think. Like I think that's like what this talk for me was thinking about. Like, I went to school at Berkeley, and Darrell Fields has a methodology that he teaches at Berkeley that he calls DIRT, the Design Research Track. And it's invested in what he calls Black methodology. And he specifically designed it so that, kind of similar to the way that I'm talking about it, you can do these things and not be Black, right? But then that feels kind of weird, right? Yeah. Like an institution where there's no Black people, it's like, all right, we're gonna do Black methodology today. It's like, okay, maybe, and so then it begs the question, like, what's the value? I think the question for me is, once I notice this dichotomy that you're pointing out, it's like, okay, so what's the value of this? And for me, the talk was really about teasing out difference so I could try to ascertain what the value was. And I think what I realized is that for me, yes, there's a spectrum between the root and the seed, but also it seems to me that there's something really important about like the void and the absence as a generative space. I think Afro-pessimism really focuses on the void and the absence, and revolution being kind of like impossible unless we confront it. But I think also what's interesting is like there's a value judgment in the negation, like the negative space, or like the lack of this, like we didn't have this and so we didn't have that. But I think that like in nature, a void is not a negative, like it's not a bad thing. Sure. It's just a void. And I think that framing it as a seed culture helped me get past that aspect of Afro-pessimism that I think literally was bumming me out. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it gets me thinking about when I was teaching architecture. I would say most namely at the University of Tennessee. I was living in Knoxville for a year before I came to the GSD, and when I went down there, the dean was recruiting me to teach architecture to second-year undergraduate students, and I had just taught for a couple of years at Howard, and the dean was, I was like, if I go down there, I'm not going to code switch, I'm gonna just teach what I teach, And he was like, no, we need that, bring that down. And got down there and, and
stuck to their guns, right?
Yeah.
They were really with it.
Yeah. We had a lot of fun. Even though I was teaching largely white students about, we were talking about Black rurality, Black relationships to water, and making the case that it was a legitimate area of study to architecture and to design. And of course, at the beginning of the semester, there's always like one hand that goes up that's like, so are we designing Black architecture? And I always have to kind of cock my head to the side. I'm just like, that's not really the point. I'm really more interested in, it's also not possible because none of y'all are Black. But I was really putting on the table that there is so much value to just the ways that Black folks show up in the world, whether it is this kind of unconcerned with mean time, as you've written about, sort of conventional or institutional means of measuring time, or the ways that individual and collective voices can be uplifted at the same time in the moment, right? So it's polyvocal, these polyvocal ways of learning, and I'm really interested in I don't know. It's got me. What you were saying, it just got me really thinking about like how can we teach through blackness as a kind of framework to then beget a very liberated way of learning, right? Something I think about a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think like the value of storytelling for me has always been that the complexity that you can hold with it allows for such a wide range of ways to enter a conversation that can be really, really difficult. I mean, like, everybody should give themselves a round of applause for reading the entire Dred Scott decision. When I sat down and did that by myself, I was upset for weeks, and I think there's something to generating knowledge collectively that hasn't really been explored in a lot of institutions, because there aren't a lot of people who have that kind of framework with what to bring it, and then also who have the energy to bring it once they actually get to the institution, right? And so I think like it's really about finding ways to subvert it to give yourself energy. Like a lot of what I do is like to keep me fresh.
Yeah, it's gotta be fun for me first and foremost.
Yeah, you know, and I think that in an earlier conversation here on this stage, there was a talk about like the importance of Black joy, and like you can never talk about it enough, right? And I think that not just Blackness, but like the joy of all people. Like I recently started reading Angela Davis's autobiography, and if you want to get really nerdy, I'm very nerdy if you couldn't tell. I actually first read the preface to every edition up until that edition, because Angela's like really Angela's like doesn't miss, and so every edition, right, like every edition she says, you know what, I thought I was woke then, but I'm so much more woke now. And in the last iteration, it was right after this kind of Floyd moment of reckoning that the institutions had. And she talked about it for a second, but then immediately was like, but what I really realized is that I wasn't even feminist enough to like do this. And like the way that she tied those things together, I was like, man, like she has done for herself, like she's carved out this space for herself to create joy in every single, and if you read this forward, just the forward throughout the years, it's like you see that every 5 years, she's like, you know what, I've carved out a new space of joy, and right now, this is like a sapphic joy, and like last time it's a Black joy, and like this time it's a socialist joy, and I think that as, not just as a tool of resistance, but actually as an actual method, like a method of doing a thing, it's super underutilized.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
There was, been thinking a lot about I think a lot about Black joy, just even my own practice. But I feel like in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of comments on this idea of Black excellence.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting to see how there's been a kind of counter criticism to Black excellence, which I feel like has been something that that has been taught as a kind of altruistic aspiration for a lot of Black youth. And I'm now at a point where I'm like kind of pro like Black mediocrity. Like
aggressive, right? Like aggressively.
Radical mediocrity is what we should just coin that right now.
Yeah.
I don't know, something that I've been thinking
about. Let's do it. Let's start a movement.
Yeah, the radical mediocre school.
We'll do it tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, let's do it.
Yeah.
Maybe the idea of let's say aspiring for less than ideal, was taking a look at an essay that you wrote actually in this journal called Failed Architecture. And I was actually the writing that you did, which was like on like embodied energy, embodied labor, embodied materials, things that architects talk about and think about a lot, was also just kind of stuck on the title of the journal, Failed Architecture. And I was just curious on like, what your reading of failure is in the discipline, and what maybe in a way like what is your reading of like sort of the current state of affairs for architecture, and like what are we pushing back against right now? And
I find myself often in rooms like the people that I agree with the most are always like bemoaning the state of everything that I like a lot, So I consider myself like I'm a big music fan. I actually really like architecture. I really like it. And I remember when I started getting into like this kind of theoretical stuff, everybody was just so surprised that I liked it. They're like, yeah, but like all these things you're saying, like the field is terrible. And I was like, yeah, I know, man, but like could be different. and I think that for me, that space is not even one of optimism. It's just the way that I think about the world, which is that in order for something to have failed, it would have to just be over. And there are just very few things that have ended. You know, like most things are still happening. So I think that the way that I think about time and embodiedness and failure is really just like, but I'm not finished yet. Like when I'm done, then you can tell me if I failed or not, but like I'm just not done. Yeah. So I feel that way about architecture, and I feel that way about a lot of things. Like even this current moment, which is mad depressing with AI and stuff like that, especially for people who make music and stuff like that. It's like, it's really grim. Yeah. It's grim out there, and it's grim out there with the environment and all these things, but it's also just not over yet. Right. And I think we didn't get to that part of listing the methodologies, but it's like out of all the people in the world, like who could get in a room together with nothing and come out with something, like it's like a room like this. Yep. So I feel like to talk about failure is kind of maybe even missing the point in that way. Yeah. You know?
Yeah. I think maybe as a last question, I had a lot more questions, but I've been half joking at my current position the current moment in my career as a recovering architecture professor, because I've recently switched to teach media studies at NYU, and what's fascinating to me is that the word culture is in both my department, which is the Department of Media, Culture, and Communication, and the schools, which is the Steinhardt School of Culture, Culture Education and Human Development. And it just got me thinking, like, what would it look like if a school of architecture had culture, the word culture in it? You know, what would be? And so the question that I had, which is sort of maybe a rapid fire, if you were to design a school, or just envision a school, we kind of talked about it. Maybe it could be the radical mediocre school. Right. Yeah. You know, what would it be called, or you know, what would be the vibe? What would maybe a course title? Is there something that's relevant from your current teaching that would be relevant to that vision? Yeah. I mean, I guess I think a lot of my thinking has been impacted by what's been going on in higher education and the current administration a lot, and the kind of precariousness of that situation for any institution who wants to produce knowledge, good or bad institution, and that gets their funding from this administration, right? It's like a super fickle relationship. And then there's like a lot of triangulation happening. Like I think I just read that he gave like a whole bunch of money to HBCUs, and it's like, okay, what? So that we could just, you know, like I don't understand quite the long game, but I think that for me, the thing that it actually made me think first was that if I was to have an architecture school, it would just be for younger kids. Like I actually just think, it's a good place to start. Yeah, radicalize them early. I just think that like when I think about what's interesting and important about architecture, it's all the things that we talked about today, and not just my talk, but the things that we were talking about before. It's like you don't need to be an adult to understand the importance of like putting your hands in the dirt, or like knowing why it's always smoggy in LA, or you know, just like understanding these things about place. And I think that to have a better citizenry, we would actually have to have everybody be spatially like literate, you know. And I think people don't know how to read space, and kids are really, really good at noticing things, but nobody's teaching them what to do with the things that they notice. And I think that, so for me, like if I was really thinking about an architecture school or an architectural like kind of pedagogy, it would really have to start, you know, like in grade school. Yeah. And that's a good place to end. Do we have time for one question? Oh, I'm out. There it is, radical mediocrity at its finest. Man, this has been awesome.
That was a good wrap up. Did you just walk on?
Yes,
sir. That was incredible. Thank you so much. My name is Lily Saki. I'm a co-chair of the conference and in my final year of the architecture program here at the GSD.
Hey y'all, my name is Stephen Early, a co-designer of the conference, and I'm also in my final year of the Master of Architecture program at the GSD.
As we close out our first day of this conference, I want to take a moment to reflect on what an incredible start it's been. Today we've heard from Indigo, Ashia Ajani, and Ife Franklin, who talked about collective memory and collective futures. We workshopped our home place with Kristen Mims Skabnicki and established Black roots through incredible storytelling from our keynotes, Kevin Daye. A special thank you to all our speakers and moderators for setting such a high bar, and to our audience both here and online for your engagements, your questions, and your energy throughout this day.
So we wish we had more time, but we will get into some housekeeping details about the weekend. So first, we just want to remind everyone to come back here in this theater at 8:45 a.m. for a morning address by the Black and Design co-chairs. And then we'll break out into panels and workshops. There'll be some workshops to choose from, like the Walking While Black with Garnett, if you want to shout out yours.
I'm very excited for Scala, who's a GSD alumni. She's coming back for a workshop.
And also highlight the Water Rights Workshop by Monica Lewis-Patrick. And then we'll have lunch. And at 3 p.m., you can either enter into Piper for a panel discussion or attend a workshop. And finally, at 5, we can join for the Saturday keynote. Yeah. Okay, and so now what's next? To give you a sense, we have 5 performers. Kara in Washington, Joe Camara, Luana Brasan Ramos, Ivana Cuesta Gonzalez, and Amelia Deshmukh will begin playing on the stage momentarily, and then they will lead us into our evening reception, beer and drums. If you purchase a meal ticket to beer and drums reception, you find your meal in Portico 123. If you can also pick up drinks, both alcoholic and non-alcoholic options available at the bar in Stubbins, which is Gund 112. Be sure to put on your gold wristband before going to get drinks, and then everyone will proceed into the dance floor that's open in Chow House. So thank you again for joining for the first day of Black and Design. Now we welcome the performers to the stage.
We have cousins here, both in our bodies, through our bodies, we are cousins. But we also have all these cousins of instruments here. We have Haiti represented here, Peru represented here, Brazil represented here, Ghana represented here, Mali represented here. From Haiti. Yamalu. It's called Igbo. have been in a very full, rich day. So we're just gonna play one more song for you. And it's gonna lead us out. It's a song from Brazil. So we're switching again. Bringing you to Ijesha and bringing in the water. Bringing in Oshun. Hey, hey. Oro mi ma, yo.